And we're live, everybody. Welcome to Brainfood Live on Air. It's just in time management. I've just come back from lunch. I am in Madrid right now, where I've had the enormous pleasure of meeting a few of the Brainfooders over here in this great city, and indeed sampling some of the amazing food here. So I'm just like sprinting to get back to our new studio, courtesy of our friends at Personio. So thank you, Personio, for hosting and being making their conference room available for me to do this live stream. Folks, I'm very excited to be having this conversation with you today because it has been a topic that's been on my mind over the last 2 months or more. In fact, it's been on everyone's minds. What to make of this crazy economy that we're seeing. We are seeing high-profile tech layoffs. We are seeing talk about recession. We are seeing talk about record high inflation, cost of living crisis. Yet at the same time, recruiters are struggling to recruit candidates. Where are the candidates? Why aren't they talking to us? In market conditions like this, they should be really all over the place, should be very liquid. It isn't. So what is going on? We don't know. And in fact, the purpose of today's conversation is to try and grab a bunch of people together that come from different perspectives, labor market economists. We've got people that understand how people move to different jobs. We've got business owners also seeing what they're seeing from their perspective. It's going to be a fascinating show to take part in. It's actually the second economics focused show we're going to be doing this month, by the way. So we're going to do another one later on this month called "Where Are the Missing Workers?" Slightly different focus. So make sure you join in on that as well. Okay, folks, let's do a quick sound check as usual before we kick off. I am in a new environment, so I actually not sure whether anybody can hear me in the right way or whether that's sort of the sound is okay. So if you can hear me okay on Crowdcast, can you just quickly indicate on the chat to say that the audio and the video is okay? And I'm not just speaking into the void. There is something wrong with my sort of headphones right now, so I can't really hear too much in a strange way. Also, we should be broadcasting this on my LinkedIn page. So if you can see it on LinkedIn and you're watching it there, give me some sort of sign whether you can hear me okay. That would be good to know. Thank you, Colin. Good to know. Thank you, Daniela. Looks like Crowdcast is fine. Just going to check whether we're going to be okay on LinkedIn, because that is to be confirmed. Let me just check on the mobile. This is how I check LinkedIn. Yeah, I seem to be on there. So that's good. Okay, that's awesome. Listen, quick shout out to our sponsors, folks, because Brainfood Live cannot work without our sponsor support. Every single week, we've got a company coming up and giving us their support to make sure these shows continue to go on. This week, I'm pleased to say the sponsor is Tripad. Tripad is an ATS that is doing some great work, particularly in the high volume sector and in the public sector in the UK and elsewhere. Do check them out if you are a business that's interested in looking at a product that's been optimized for that type of demographic and that type of volume of workflow. So Tripad, by the way, they've been producing some amazing reports also. I don't know whether anybody caught my post on earlier this week. We talked about the state of recruitment. Tripad were part of that. They produced that amazing report. So not only are they a product that is doing some great things for the industry, they're also producing some really interesting insight as well. So make sure you browse their content section on their website as well as check out them as a product. Okay, very, very good. Let's get on with the show. As usual, folks, we're going to change the scene. We don't do newsletter review anymore. We're going to shift that over to a Monday show called Monday Baked Fresh. However, obviously, with the news of the Queen lying in state, we're actually going to postpone sort of Brainfood Baked Fresh next week. So we're going to be back the week following, and thereafter it should be every Monday where we review last week's newsletter. So we're going to use today's conversation to dive straight into the topic and talk about what the heck's going on with the economy. So I'm going to bring our guests on right away. Let's see whether we can get them on. Let's make sure they're all here, actually, because we've got some new guests for us that I don't think have ever been on the show before. And it'd be very good to get them on. But I can see a few of them already. Let's see whether we can bring... There she is. Katrina is here. I'm going to invite Katrina Hutchinson-o'Neill on. Colin Donnery is back again. He is coming on also. I see John Boyce. So John, I need to congratulate you on your honeymoon, I believe. So let's bring him on. And I hope I can see Sarah as well. Yes, I can. Let's bring her on as well. Okay, we have Katrina at least. Katrina, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Hey, good, thank you. Yeah, got the heating on today for the first time.
Oh no, it's starting to get a bit.
My husband was being romantic. He said, "It's Friday. I've got a special treat for you. I've put the heating on." I'm like, "Thanks, sweetheart."
I was going to say heating your mansion as well, Katrina. That's not an easy thing to do.
I'm actually an old house in Scotland. They're all cold.
It's actually a castle, in case people don't know. Katrina lives in like the most uninsulated building in the country.
Uninsulated, I'll give you that much.
Which is not great. Anyway, everybody is here, which is great to see. So let's do some quick intros. Katrina, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Katrina Hutchinson-o'neill, CEO and co-founder of Join Talent, former in-house recruitment TA director. Pleased to be here.
Great to have you on the show, Katrina. And we've got Colin Donnery as well. Colin, great to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
How you doing, guys? Colin Donnery, FRS. We're a cooperative. We have about 2,500 employees. We have a recruitment agency business, but we're in around the agriculture sector as well, employability, all about moving people into jobs and getting people back into the workforce. So that's what we do.
Fantastic. And we've got John Boyce here as well. John, firstly, John, congratulations, I believe, because you're a recently married man. I understand. You're muted, John, I'm afraid. Let me just unmute you. No, I think you need to unmute yourself, my friend.
Yeah, we'll say commiserations to John on his recent.
Whilst he's getting unmuted, we'll figure something out there. And we have Sarah Ali as well. Dr. Sarah Ali, great to meet you, Sarah. Can you quickly introduce yourself, who are you, what it is you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Hung. Nice to meet you. Dr. Sarah Ali. I'm here right now in Chicago, global economist at Radancy. Radancy is actually a global talent tech leader based in New York City. And we work with Fortune 500 companies, helping them solve their problems, on the human capital life cycle. Nice to meet you all.
Great to see you, Sarah. And John, I think you're with us. Is that right?
Hi there. Yeah, sorry. It chose the wrong microphone by default, and it was having a time. Yeah, thanks very much. And I'm actually getting married a week tomorrow, so this was my last opportunity to. Anyway, I'm the labour market economist at the CIPD, and I'm very soon to be having a couple of weeks off to do those things. So thanks for remembering. Yeah, but I'm the labour market economist, CIPD, and I spend a lot of time looking at jobs in the labour market and this issue specifically. So I'm very happy to be here.
Great stuff. And thank you, John, for sparing time. I think it is your last day in the office before you go off on your wedding and honeymoon. So it's great to catch you whilst we have you. So that's great stuff. Okay, let's talk about, let's start with you, John, actually, because you very recently have done some research on this, trying to make sense as to how people are moving about in this economy. One of the things that's obviously been very striking in terms of the news just has been these high profile layoffs, particularly on the VC side type of businesses. There seems that the easy VC funding is starting to not be there anymore, which has impact on all of these scale up plans and what have you. And then the news media loves this. We love to hear about these big businesses, but at the same time, we're struggling to hire. It's still a case where we have persistent candidate issues. So what is your quick interpretation of all of that? Why are we getting this incongruity?
I don't really think there's an incongruity, just because the redundancy rate is at a record low. So we might have some high profile tech companies that are sort of thinking ahead and running out of VC money, but the rest of the economy is not experiencing this. The rest of the economy is very much struggling to get the workforce that it needs. And there's kind of two things you can do. You can go out and hire people, or you can stem the flow of them going out. And for the most part, most businesses are very much doing the opposite of what these tech companies are doing. Their redundancy rate is at a record low, and so yeah, not so much an incongruity. It's very interesting. I think a lot of our lifestyles, the Ubers and the Deliveroos and things, for the last sort of 5-7 years have been built on the basis of a lot of easy VC capital. And now it's not there. Sort of makes you wonder if these were always viable business models in the first place. But certainly, if we head into a downturn, then this is the time at which you see a shakeout of, business models that aren't viable. So it will be interesting to see where that goes, and inevitably the redundancy rate in the general economy will pick up as the economy heads into a downturn towards the end of this year.
What is the redundancy rate in the UK, John? And I'll ask you the question in the US, Sarah, as well, because it's good to get the good comparison there. But you're saying actually the redundancy rate is really low. So what is that number, and what should be the normal number, so to speak?
So redundancy rate is the sort of rate of people being made redundant out of 1,000 employees, and it's just actually looking, it's 2.3 for every 1,000 employees at the moment. It's sort of headed up to around about 15 during the middle of the pandemic, when there was a lot of uncertainty, and then it plunged straight back down and went to below pre-pandemic trends. So there's a very small rate of people sort of facing the prospect of redundancy at the moment. But the fact that it sort of jumped from 3%, well, not 3%, 3 per 1,000 to 15 during the pandemic, it can move around, and it's inevitably going to start to rise again as the cost of living crisis sort of
very those are interesting numbers, aren't they, folks? Like, I'm not an economist, I don't know, and just to be introduced to some of this terminology I think is super useful. So redundancy rate is a per 1,000 figure, and you're basically trying to get a sample of that and understand what that number is. It's gone from a pandemic peak in the UK of 15 per 1,000 to I understand 2.3, and the current state, which is below pre-pandemic kind of levels. Dr. Sarah Ali, quickly go to you. We all know that every economy is operating differently. Even national economies, within national economies is variation. But can you give us like some sort of a national overview on the US side? How are things sort of operating there? What's the redundancy rate, is if there's an equivalent sort of number over there?
Yeah, I was actually listening. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. We don't have a redundancy rate. We have some other stuff. But let me give you a little breakdown of the U.S. economy. Job openings, they're super high, right? They were 11.2 million this month. And, that's a tight market. But here's the other thing. Looking at the quits data actually is going down in the last 3 months. And the layoffs actually are going up in the last 3 months. And that, to me, as an economist, is basically the first signs of a cooling labor market. And then our inflation numbers just came out, right? It's 8.3%. So you're going to see the Fed continue to increase interest rates, right? It's a hawkish policy right now. Spending is going down. People are not saving as much money. There's definitely a shift in this country in terms of what Americans are prioritizing right now.
So this is quite interesting. You have a quit rate, which is, I don't think we have this. So this is a voluntary. It's quitting, right? So a number of people that leave their jobs voluntarily. Correct. And then you have another number, which is the layoff rate, which is, I guess, involuntary people leaving. Exactly. And can you remind me again which numbers are going up or down on those two?
Yeah, so basically separations are a sum of quits plus layoffs plus other types of separations. And so quits in the last few months actually have gone down, and then layoffs actually in the last few months have gone up. And that to me is a signal that, hey, this market is cooling down, even though we're seeing such high job postings in the data.
Yeah, very interesting. And we could probably anticipate things like additional risk aversion from candidates if they feel as if they less confident in the state of the market, let's say, and maybe they end up like sticking around in jobs they don't enjoy because they feel, I got to batten my heads down a little bit on this. Let's go to Katrina and Colin, because both of you two are business owners, business operators that service companies that typically do a lot of recruiting. So can you tell us a quick narrative over what you've seen in your businesses, given the very different types of companies in different sectors, but what have you seen over the last, say, 6 months or so? So, middle of Q1 this year to date, how would you describe the pattern of customer behavior that you've seen? Katrina, go to you on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's probably a couple of different things. I think first up, and it's always a challenge when you're looking at data on an aggregate level. When you start to dig in below that, some of the patterns that are sitting below that kind of nationalized or international data are very different. So if you look at the Korn Ferry report that was sent out beginning of this year, they estimated that we've got a global shortage of, I think it was like 4.3 million tech workers, based on current demand versus what's available in the market. And that's forecasted to get worse, not better, over the next couple of years, because education and training is still not keeping track with the demand of companies. So this was a little bit like if we're going into a recession, the last recession, where there were plenty of jobs where there was an overage of workers, and therefore there were layoffs and there were, people unemployed. But at the same time, and I was a recruitment manager through that recession, we were still really busy because there was still a ton of recruitment and there were still labor shortages. Back then it was risk compliance and tech roles. This time it's probably more tech product, digital data, AI type roles. So we're seeing that, to kind of more directly answer your question, we're seeing that playing in at the minute. There's definitely a big shift from, I don't think we're likely to see the boom times of 2001 and Q1 2002 as a recruitment sector. And I mean that in-house, agency, RPO, wherever you are, recruiters being so in demand. I think that was almost a sort of once in a career situation in terms of the conflation of a number of different events. So we've gone from a market where, frankly, if you had 100 tech recruiters queued up outside your door, you would have every single one of those people with 20 different companies chasing those tech recruiters tomorrow, to the needs have become more specific and more specialized. So we don't have a drop in terms of demand, but the demand has become much more complex and much more niche in its type. So it's we're doing a huge amount of recruitment in Japan, for example. We're doing a huge amount of recruitment in UAE. We're doing a lot of recruitment in AI and data and analytics, whereas before it was more on GTM or on sort of SREs or DevOps. So there's a lot of change happening under the surface of that demand. And I've got a bunch of other opinions. Don't know if there's much relevance to the question you just asked around what that's telling us around the success of different countries in their investment in entrepreneurs and growth of business. And the UK is definitely not leading the way on that at the minute. And that's what we're seeing in the work that we're doing internationally with our clients.
We should definitely talk about that, because I think there's no question that national policies have a huge impact in terms of just how confident companies can be to do forward planning, and how secure they are that the government is going to be there to provide the framework for them to succeed, even if you have a suboptimal environment externally. So jumping over to you, Colin, different sector or even different country, right? So I think a lot of your recruitment work is focused on Ireland, and as you say, a lot of it is in the agricultural side and so on. Can you give us a quick narrative again? Last 6 months, what's been going on?
Yeah, so look, we cover across every sector, right? But we're a cooperative, so our parent company is agriculture. So we see, I suppose, demand on the labor side, at entry level for, things like warehousing, etc. Virtually impossible to find people at the moment. If you look at the, I suppose, manufacturing index here, one of the big areas they look at is constraints in terms of labor supply. So 40% of manufacturing companies in Ireland are saying we can't find the requisite employees to deliver output that we need to output, right? We've got 48 of the top 50 US multinationals in Ireland, right? So we're at a confluence of sort of Europe and America. So if they catch a cold in the US, it tends to hit us relatively hard over here. But we haven't really seen that. What we've sort of seen is I suppose, hiring slowing really, rather than stopping. There's high demand, as Katrina said, as usual, across tech, manufacturing, literally everything, right? So our unemployment rate here, so we had the worst recession in Europe and the world in 2008, right? So we got up to about 18% unemployment, which is sort of unbelievable for a small country of at the time, 4.5 million people. We dropped to technically what's called full employment in Ireland back in about 2017, which is around 4.3% in Ireland. During COVID, that increased to almost 8%. It's back to about 4.2% 4.2% right now. So we're at technical full employment. I think what we're seeing across literally every sector is, and you sort of touched on it there, Hung, in this sort of attitudes. So the stuff that's going on in the marketplace in terms of increased, electricity, gas, prices increasing on candidates, that has a huge effect on candidates. So one, they see it in their pocket, right? So basically, any increases are outstripping, I suppose, wage increases that are happening in the labour market, and they've been happening massively in Ireland over the last 4 or 5 years. We've just seen the minimum wage. Ireland will now have the second highest minimum wage as of announced yesterday, only to Luxembourg. And there's a real I think what we're starting to see is a cost of employment problem, right? So this we're starting to see governments, particularly in weak, I suppose, politically weak political governments, trying to, I suppose, appease, the electorate by increasing salaries, minimum wages, etc., and employers on the other side trying to keep a can on everything, right? So and you mentioned that it's a survey we do every year. We measure attitudes. And the one thing that happens and the thing that changes is, I suppose, the economy in the country, right? So what we see is as the economy declines and things look bad, even if it's only perception, candidates stop moving, right? So I would predict what we're going to see is an even tighter labour market. Unless, I suppose, we start to see an awful lot of unemployment and layoffs, right? But in Ireland at the moment, we don't think we're going to see that. We, potentially maybe get back up to 6%, if things go relatively bad. I suppose as an armchair economist, not an expert like the two guys, I would say the big problem could be interest rates. So because if interest rates increase in line with inflation, like in Ireland in the 1980s, I'm just about old enough to remember, 17% interest rates here, and an unemployment rate of 14%. So if we see, interest rates starting to climb, what happens then is people stop spending, and organizations, and that money you talk about that floats around, in terms of investments in companies, is going to slow because it's actually pays you more to stick it in the bank.
Yeah, very, very interesting as well. And by the way, Colin, you are absolutely old enough to remember all of that stuff. So let's not try and pretend anything else there. Okay. Quite interested to know a little bit about this candidate psychology element, because have we reached a tipping point, would you say? And by the way, it is all speculation, right? So we don't really know. But how do you think we've reached a point where candidates have decided to shut it down until unspecified future, where they think, you know what, I'm gonna be, as you mentioned, Katrina, glory, the brief peak that we saw at the start of 2022, that's like ancient history now. Everyone's like feeling slightly differently. Is it shut down? Are we struggling to connect with candidates? Are we higher dropout rates on sort of when they're in system, harder to close as we get them to offer? Like, what are you guys seeing? I mean, I guess specifically Katrina and Colin on this, but open to anybody's thoughts, really.
So I definitely think we've seen a small shift, but it's not substantial. I think if anything, I'd probably call out the shift that hasn't happened is many candidates who haven't realised that a shift has happened. That's definitely something that I'm seeing across all of the clients that we work with. Candidates who still think that we're in the market that we were in 2021 in the first quarter of 2022.
So you're saying their demands are still elevated. They're still got huge sort of. They're talking as if they've got all of the shoe on both feet, I guess.
We're still seeing it, particularly in some of the people who are rolling off companies. Where people move during the peak of the kind of boom in the labour market in some of those more in-demand roles where demand has fallen. And that wouldn't be necessarily tech roles, by the way, because that has stayed pretty constant in terms of demand. But some of the ancillary roles, interestingly, including recruitment roles, the readjustment hasn't happened, but employers have moved a little bit faster on that, I think.
Yeah, that would also make sense, wouldn't it? Because sort of those candidates episodically on the market, so they like have heightened interest when they're looking. So maybe that's every 3-6 months or every year or whatnot.
And right. So if you moved a year ago and you moved from 50 grand to 60 grand, and you now need to move again through no fault of your own, you kind of expect that you're probably going to go from 60 to 65 or 65 to 70,000 base. Maybe stay the same, but it might be a little bit of a blow to realize that the market's actually retracted a little bit to probably more where it should have been, and that 60 might now be 55. That's a hard thing for people to square a circle on, I think.
Yeah, and I guess we're going to have to start spotting sort of job advertising sort of rates, I guess, which might help us with that. So it's the stuff that you focus on, Sarah, would give the candidates a bit more intelligence to think, right, this is where the market level is.
Absolutely. And actually, Hung, and to the colleagues here on this call, I was going to say that Radancy, actually, we collect internal data from candidates and we ask them questions about what are they prioritizing, right, when they're looking for a job. In the last 3 months, the data that I'm looking at by gender, it shows to me that work having a greater purpose, interesting and challenging work, and then good people to work with, that's actually increased in the last 3 months. But getting ahead in my career, convenience and compensation and benefits actually have declined. I think that's interesting because I think in the beginning of this pandemic, when, job seekers actually have an advantage, they still do, but comp and benefits was up there, right? And then the convenience factor was already baked into the equation, with COVID, obviously. So it's interesting as well to kind of see this reverse in the trends, from the data that at least I'm looking at.
That's really interesting. And Sarah's been really amazing sending me these reports, by the way, which I've been featuring into the Brainfood newsletter on a fairly regular basis. I'm trying to encourage companies to do this, like particularly vendors that have got access to this data. I think it's really useful for people to just have this data point. So please pay attention to that directly, but you'll probably see it in the Brainfood newsletter at some point as well. Let's talk about particular industry sectors. John, going to you on this. I mean, I'm not sure whether you've gone to that level of granularity at the CIPD, but are you tracking sort of which sectors seem to be, starting to increase the redundancy rate, for instance, and where the job creation is smaller than others? Is there any kind of sort of information you can give us on that?
I mean, we do, but I mean, my problem is, apart from the fact that there's a lag in a lot of the official stats, and the official stats give us kind of bigger samples that we can do things like break down by industry. But most of the data I've got just says that things are still red hot. The number of vacancies being advertised is still up there near a record high. People try and read into things. They go, "Oh no, it's marginally smaller." I'm like, "Yeah, but look at it; it's through the roof. Like it's still on fire." And Canada. I just was looking at the job-to-job move numbers. They're below their peak, but they're still way above anything pre-pandemic. So people are still moving around. Essentially, I think that there's a market for getting some sort of press coverage and trying to guess this peak and go, "Oh, I don't know," a market for maybe being a bit more miserable than things are. So, it's about to peak, it's about to turn sour. And every time the data comes in, so labour market stats came out on Tuesday, I look at it and I go, "Oh, it's not peaked yet." It's still red hot. So it's difficult to say, no, I've not, particularly noticed the redundancy rate creep up in any one sector or another sector. And to be honest, I think redundancy is kind of a lagging indicator. Companies don't really like to get rid of people. It's called labor hoarding. So even after a downturn, you kind of do everything you can to say you want to reduce the size of the workforce. You do everything you can before making redundancy. So you might put a hiring freeze on, natural churn would lower the rate, and then redundancies come. So that's probably what it is. I think we'll see redundancies, but they'll probably just happen in time. In fact, the Bank of England's forecasts say that the unemployment rate, right? The unemployment rate in the UK, Colin's talking about full employment in Ireland. I think we reached full employment and then the unemployment rate just kept going down to the point where now it's at 3.6%, which is a crazy low number.
Yeah, but John, hasn't it been interesting to see the I presume your participation rate is increasing in the UK as well, is it, or has it, because of, I suppose, home working and more, I suppose, females entering the labour market? Or
you've hit the nail on the head, right? So our unemployment rate is very low, but the inactivity rate is creeping up such that the total size of the workforce is actually lower. And and that's problematic. Well, I was just going to say that we're not really expecting unemployment to rise until the middle of 2023. So, we're talking about the energy crisis and how difficult this winter is going to be. But some of these labour market indicators, they lag. I'm not just talking about a lag in the time it takes to get the data. I'm talking about the fact that they're not, like employment, for example, is a terrible indicator of recession, because the recession comes along and then employment sort of starts to go down. So that's probably why I can't tell you much about redundancy rates and who's struggling, just because we're still very much at that frontier. I'm sure data will start to come in a bit sooner, but yeah.
No, but you have educated us on a few very important sort of concepts in looking at numbers of this type. I think one of the features that has occurred really, in COVID, everyone's been turned into pseudo experts really quickly because of the superficial accessibility of all of this information. But sometimes we don't have the depth of knowledge to truly understand.
It's dangerous in the wrong hands, Hung. It's dangerous in the wrong hands, man.
This is why I'm hands-free, man. I try not to drive in any direction. No, but there's a few important points you mentioned that are kind of related to this, which is sort of the layoffs are the big kind of headlines. They kind of make more noise than perhaps they deserve. But the hidden kind of problem may be things like hiring freezes, which are, typically companies don't make big noises about this. It's an internal communique. Maybe a few recruiters get made redundant or repurposed or whatever, but operationally outside, it doesn't look as if too much has changed. So it doesn't get reported. Is there any way in which we can track that, like the slowdown of hiring within the company? Can we do that at an aggregate level, or are we reliant on just like word on the street type of stuff?
Job boards hung, and sort of vacancy sort of advertising is probably the key area. You look at it. This, but it doesn't give you the.
Yeah. Sarah and John both said that actually those are still at peak levels, aren't they? So.
Yeah, they are, but that's the thing we're seeing. So I actually was at a recruitment dinner last night, had plenty of glasses of wine, and that our good friend James Osborne was there. And I suppose what we had in the room was, I suppose, the Irish recruitment industry, right? And the reason I was there was I want to know what's going on. Are we going to see a cliff edge here and things are just going to disintegrate fairly quickly? But everyone was sort of, we're all expecting this sort of crash, but it's not coming. Why isn't it coming? And I think it's basically down to the reason John said that there's just less workers out there. You know what I mean? But again, getting back to it, people are starting to now. I think starting to sit tight. If they're going to make a move, they're really going to look like before COVID. 2019, when things were really at helter skelter space within the tech, like. Candidates weren't really checking out where they were going an awful lot. Like, it's like, oh, look, I'm going to get an increase, 10%, 8%, etc. And they're just moving. They're not doing massive amount of research. What's happening now is candidates are starting to research those particular companies. They're going to looking at things like, stock exchange price. Are they tanking? Are investment gone? Looking at a much more sort of macro level. I think that the tipping point, or the time to look for us really as an industry, is probably February next year, right? So typically what happens is people over Christmas and that break, etc., start to look at their career, new life, new career, etc. And normally we see from February to April that real spike in terms of, although September is probably the biggest year for moves, I think usually we see it here, February to May, April is really, really busy sort of time. So is this cost of living increase and cost of employment increase, is that going to flatten out that? But ultimately what's going to happen is it's going to tighten the labor market even further, like, because people aren't going to move, they're going to be afraid to move. I think a macro thing that's happening there. I had a great quote the other day. We've never had more jobs, we've never been paid more, and we are all somehow the poorer for it, right? So it's like there's this sort of thing going on out there where people are going, we're all working harder, we're getting paid more, but what's this all about? And I think that's sort of to one of the points earlier was around doing, really powerful work, great work in organizations is becoming really much more important, and that's what is attracting candidates now.
There's also like there's a lot of sector variability though in terms of whether the pay is being like keeping pace with cost of living, for instance, and that's not being uniform. So I think a lot of people that may be feeling, yeah, you know, we've gained from this period. There's equally large numbers of people that actually have really seen their real sort of income have decreased over time.
Yeah, like if you look at hospitality, you know, transport, production, you know, those areas, people's, you know, net income, and John might have some detail on this, like it's low, like costs are going like this, you know what I mean? And, you know, they're usually getting small increases, you know, each year, you know, so I think that's the area that real pressure is coming under. I think what will happen is the cost of employment, I suppose, you know, employers are going to look to technology more, automation, etc. Because look, you know, in times where when labor, particularly in Europe, is relatively expensive, you know, for years we were sort of, you know, from Europe outsourcing it, you know what I mean? Companies are starting to look much more now at technology and automation in terms of replacing workers with automation. I think that's probably if it keeps going the way it is, that's going to definitely have an impact soon. So.
I was served the beer by a robot waiter only a couple of months ago, and I thought, that's obviously the future. You know, it was late in the evening. I was definitely not the right type of customer for them. So there's no reason why a human being would ever be better than a robot. So yes,
it's never going to catch on in Ireland, man. It's never catching on in Ireland. I can tell you that.
I don't know. I was away for business this week, and I was staying at an airport hotel in Zurich. And when you order room service, a robot brings you your room service. I thought it was amazing.
Did it come to your bed, or did it leave at the door, Katrina?
No, it comes to the door, and you get a phone call to say, open your door.
Come and collect. It's the future, right? So that's going to happen. I do think food retail in particular is one of those industries where we're going to have a massive sea change. People don't want to do that work anymore. It's very difficult. The hours are tough. The money's never been great. We've been paying for cheap eating out hot food. You know, we've all of us have had the benefit of that. But I don't think you can maintain those prices and maintain that type of labor cost and still have people do the job. I mean, they just ain't going to do it. Okay, folks, this is actually a really good time to take a mini break. We kind of shouldn't ever forget this. This is obviously a really deep topic, and it's not only one topic. It's like a massive story, loads of subsectors that we get into. We are going to do another show on this, and I'm going to keep talking about economy in the sense I'm just trying to educate myself. Hopefully, you're going to educate yourself as well by being a participant here. But remember, Brainfood is always a conversation starting show. It's not a show that should ever end a conversation. We're always here to make sure that we're going to start a conversation thread. You continue it when we have to come off air. So now is a good time to just take a moment, take your LinkedIn profile and stick it in the chat stream on Crowdcast, and then connect with everyone else who is doing the same thing. There's about 60, 70 people watching us on LinkedIn, maybe similar numbers on Facebook and Twitter. I'd recommend you do the same. Just take your LinkedIn profile, connect it, stick it into the comment thread at the bottom of wherever you're watching it, and then just connect with everyone else who's doing the same thing. These are all people that are interested in this topic. They should all be people that would be interested in continuing the conversation once we do have to come off air. So make sure you walk away from this with at least a strong network of people that are interested in this topic. Okay, I see a few people do that, which is good stuff. Let's move on to do some future projection for 2022. Recession, what do we reckon? Is it happening? Has it already happened? Is it a big deal if it happens? Like, is it just a technical thing that no one cares about? What are our thoughts here? Let's go around the room. Katrina, do you want to go first with that?
Yeah, well, so I think there's more learned people than I am in terms of looking at Economist level projections on the call in terms of Sarah and John. But certainly based on my experience historically and being in recruitment for quite a long time now, but also looking at what we're seeing with the clients that we're working with today and the many clients that we're talking to who are coming in, I do think we're going to start to see a recession hitting recruitment in some areas. But I think we're just not in other areas. And I think the biggest thing that people are struggling with at the minute is more personal around rising things we've already mentioned, rising costs of energy, even down to or is it inflation or recession, right? What are you supposed to, is cash king, or do you not want to have cash? Which one do you want to do? It's all very confusing for people at the minute, and I think that is permeating into their working lives as well.
Yeah, I was going to get rid of my cash. I started researching into Rolexes. I thought, you know what, I'll only buy a Rolex here.
You can't buy them anymore, Tom. There's no, if you ever walk through an airport, they're all exhibition only now.
Do you know what, the Rolex prices are going down though? I mean, I was like shocked. I
Really?
thought, hey, everyone's surely luxury good. This is actually maintain value in these types of uncertain times. No, it's actually crashing. So I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But
You have
yeah,
to give up the Rolex collection then, hun.
yeah, it's like literally, no one knows where to park their values if they have any kind of value, right? So anyway, Colin, go to you. Recession, yes, no, is it a big deal? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this will be probably country specific. I would certainly, looking from here, worry about the UK. I think Brexit, other than maybe John disagrees, but I would certainly think the UK has a lot of problems coming. I think, even from a labour market perspective, look, to me, what drove the UK economy for the last 30 or 40 years was bringing people in and, great talent in, and it drove the economy. I think you guys have got a real problem. Ireland, probably not as much. We're probably insulated a little bit at the moment because of our, I suppose, the US multinational base. Agriculture is really, really strong here at the moment. And in general, we're doing fine. It just depends. It's all about interest rates and inflation. They keep climbing. We've got a real problem probably in the first quarter of next year.
You failed to make a prediction, Colin.
Yeah, no, I don't think we'll see a recession in Ireland in 2023.
Great, excellent. And by the way, we should totally talk about sort of the country variance. I think absolutely that's the case. The economic mix in every business is different. The politics is different. Attitudinally to work, it's different. So all of this is very interesting. Dr. Sarah Ali, what's your view from the US side on the recession? Is it happening? Has it happened? Is it a big
Absolutely.
deal?
For me, honestly, as an economist, I keep going 50-50. I'm a little risk averse. I'm a little risk loving, right? I mean, people have been so wrong with all of our economic models. So that's why I'm kind of like 50-50. But for us in the US, right, the National Bureau of Economic Research, they actually determine whether the US is in a recession. So basically from a technical definition, right, it's a decline in two consecutive quarters of GDP. Exactly. But here's the issue. We still have inflation. We still have supply chain problems. And then I know there were some comments earlier made, but I will say one thing. In the US, our numbers are totally contradicting everything. We have high job openings. Okay, great. Our unemployment is still relatively low. Our labor force participation rate went up. Our civilian labor force up pre-pandemic. Yet, right, we still have all these job vacancies and we have issues finding people. And I think it kind of goes back to, why are people not coming back into the labor force? And I guess, Hung, I won't jump into that topic just now because I know that's coming up, obviously. But, it's such a mixed reaction. So, I mean, a lot of our clients and executives are concerned about inflation. I mean, I feel like for me as an economist, I'm doing scenario planning, right? Like, is it going to be like this? Is it going to be like that? The beginning of the pandemic, when economists were planning, if you all remember, like a K-shaped recovery, an L-shaped recovery. I mean, I don't remember which alphabet, letter, just pick one, right? This is where we were going. But, I'm optimistic as a person and probably as an economist, not too optimistic, but, I'm cautious. So I'm going to say 50-50 to hedge my bets.
That's I want to say that's okay.
No, that's not allowed, Hung. That's not allowed. No.
I know, but Sarah just give like such a comprehensive sort of an intelligent response. It's like hard for me to veto that. No, but I think it's really interesting. By the way, folks, we will be talking about the missing workers in the next 2 weeks. I think this is actually really maybe the underlying sort of issue is all of this. Like, where are the people? Why are they reluctant to come in? Are we on some sort of unofficial general strike? Like, are we just simply down tools? I think significant percentage of people I have either spent enough time waiting for the perfect opportunity that it's just simply receded away into, it's a theoretical opportunity now, and they've found a way to survive without necessarily getting involved. Long-term sick, how big is that a problem? How many people are taking care of people that are long-term sick? We've seen long COVID, for instance. I've had COVID recently, knocked me out for like a week. Now, I would imagine if I had a persistent issue, going forward, then that could be just a debilitating thing over time. And do I show up on some stats on unemployment? I think I don't if I'm long-term sick. Am I right, John? So so I think the unemployment rate itself is not necessarily the rate of people that are not working. It's the amount of people that can work that aren't working. And it's not that number can go up or down depending on how sick the society is, right? So all of these things can have an issue. Go to you with a final question, John. Where are you in terms of, are we in recession? Does it matter? What's your view on this?
Yeah, it matters a lot. I think if I was American, I'd be a lot more optimistic. You can only, I look at the American economy with awe. The way the dynamism, the way it still grows. I've got cousins over from America right now for my wedding, and I've just sent them a BBC News article saying you've really fill your boots because the pound is at its lowest level against the dollar in 37 years. So that's kind of a big deal. For sterling to be struggling like that, our imports are more expensive. We have a problem that they don't have in America, which is that they are kind of energy independent, and we've just got this massive external shock to energy prices across Europe. That's a massive deal. The new government have basically said they're pretty much just going to wholesale bail out households. So that's, it's actually an uncapped liability because it depends on what the cost of gas is doing. But we're talking hundreds of billion, 100 billion pounds at least. So that might do something to prop up households' finances, which will curtail, mitigate, the effects of recession. But recession's almost inevitable now, and it's not looking good. It's not looking healthy, and it's very much a cause for concern.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the candor there, and we should probably talk a little bit about the energy side of things because that is a very unique thing for Europe in particular. We know US energy is independent. Some countries are actually energy independent as well. You look at Norway, sitting there, feeling fairly comfortable. But there's other countries, particularly like the UK, that's not the case. And a lot of our major trading partners in Europe, that is not the case. And we've already seen how the increase of input costs, energy input costs into other industries has actually caused huge downstream problems. Like we can't produce fertilizer anymore because it's too expensive to actually to create ammonia or something. So
three times the price. So a ton of fertilizer. So we're in the agriculture sector. A ton of fertilizer is 3.5 times the price was a year ago. So you just think about that.
Yeah. So again, depending on the economy mix, the economic mix we have, what does that all look like?
Yeah. Agriculture is just on it. Like it's actually quite interesting to look at in Ireland is agriculture, right? So, 5 years ago, a litre of milk produced, a farmer was paid 30 cents a litre, right? So he's now been paid 62 cents a litre, more or less 62 cents a litre in Ireland, right? His inputs over the last 12 months have all gone up minimum 200%, right? So, but I suppose his income is increasing, you know what I mean? But the thing that we got to look at is where does that all stop and what drives that? If the farmer is overextended in terms of, mortgages and loans and things like that, it really has an impact. And you can take that for every business because the cup of coffee you're buying in the shop, if you look at it over the last sort of 12 months, is increasing probably in the UK by 50 pence a time. Here it's 50 cents, so it's all this, and it's when does that price reach a point where it turns off the consumers? And I think the two economists probably have more answers on that than me, but you would imagine this thing has, if it keeps going the way it's going at the moment, something's sort of got to give,
Colin, you actually introduced a really interesting idea here about, your personal inflation rate. We talked about inflation, but inflation is not necessarily a single number. It's just a collection. It's a selected aggregate, isn't it? So there was one fella I remember. I think he made the newspapers, or whatever, but he just did his own inflation survey. Literally, what was his own household expenditures over time, and he tracked it on a spreadsheet. And it was stuff like coffee, and it was like how much how much was a bottle of milk, and he did that over time, and recognized actually, yes, in terms of what I spend my money on, this is how it's going up, and compared to what I'm getting income-wise, salary, that's not going up. Therefore, yes, life is getting worse in terms of my standard of living. And I just think, okay, that's probably going too far. Not many people will probably do that, but use your own data. Use your own sort of information as well as, interacting with more abstract stuff, which, we all accept we're swimming around a little bit out of our depth, apart from the people who are in professional space.
Just in terms of one thing, I think that is the micro sort of stuff that's happened with organizations for the last sort of 15 years, right? So we've had this sort of micro specialization in roles, and it was in the Brainfood about 3 weeks ago, where instead of, we've all these people who typically 30 years ago, they rise up the ladder and they become the CEO, right? So there's only so many CEO roles. We've really deep specialization in jobs now within organizations, within marketing. Think about it like 30, 25 years ago, you had probably 4 or 5 different roles. Now you've got like 50. It's like just, really, really sort of wide and sort of deep. And I think that could be a real problem for people if a sort of a recession hits, because when you're very, very specialized, it's actually easier for the organization to cover over the cracks with people than if you're, a one-man sort of, does everything type of thing, and that goes for recruiters as well a little bit, Hung, I think, you know what I mean? So it's looking at that individual, looking at their role and saying, well, I'm in a marketing sense, outbound sort of consumer analyst, etc. And I think organizations particularly, and it's probably come a lot from, I think, the hybrid stroke home working, is this productivity sort of index. So how productive are people, and organizations, the bigger ones particularly who measure this, are really worried about that at the moment. I think in the US it's dropped, considerably since pre-COVID, you know what I mean? So that's what our organizations are going to start fixing in on that. Who's productive in the organization? And what are they doing? If you're in a really sort of, look, the obvious specialized roles that I suppose are key to the growth of the organization, you're fine. But if you're a sort of a bean counter in the back sort of room there, you know what I mean, and you're giving back data and things like that, I think you could have potentially a problem. It could be completely wrong on that, but I'm just,
That's some tangent, Colin. But I don't think we can quite cover everything you're saying. But you did say very interesting things. It's led us towards something I want to end the show on, which is sort of what do individuals need to do, particularly recruiters, I guess, because most of the audience who are listening to this are going to be recruiters or people working in the recruitment industry. What would your advice be to people who are in the space feeling a little bit discomfort outside? What are their personal behaviors? Are there particular sectors they should head towards? Are there skills they should develop? What kind of behaviors or activities should they be doing at this point in time? Your thoughts on this, Katrina?
Yeah, so honestly, what I've said already, tech, product, digital, data, AI, it's not going anywhere. So anybody that is developing skills in that space as a job seeker, or recruiters who are looking to continue to grow their career, those are definitely areas to gravitate towards, and loads of amazing stories about that out there as well. One that struck home with me recently was actually a daughter of a friend of mine who was working as a waitress, and that's what she'd been doing for 2 years. Went and did a 6-month coding course, came out the back of that, and now has actual work-life balance and has gone from earning minimum wage to earning £45,000 a year, which is transformational for her, working as a junior level coder. And if you could find another 200 people like her, you'd be able to put them all into jobs tomorrow. So definitely gravitating towards those areas that you can read about in any economics or any job market reports as continued areas of growth. I think my advice to recruiters, and I think I said this on stage at RecFest this year, is don't think, this is all cyclical. We've been here before. Those of us that lived through the big crash back in the day, which doesn't seem that long ago, but it was. Those of us that lived through that, whenever we got into that situation of companies are never ever recruiting again, that's it, all hiring is frozen. Most of us have never been busier before in our lives. It might mean that you change companies. It might mean that your role slightly changes in terms of what you're focusing on. But there will be a requirement out there, and there will be a need to continue to recruit.
Yeah, that's very well said, Katrina. I remember actually during the height of the recession, the pandemic-induced recession, there was a big wave of people that were leaving the recruitment industry precisely because they perceived it to be like a permanent contraction. And then 6 months later, it was like we can't find recruiters anymore. And LinkedIn were publishing, recruiters being the premium job, the most popular in-demand job on their platform. So yeah, it is one of these where you have to hold a bit steady and understand that opportunities will always be there. For people who I guess you've got to be lucky in terms of choosing the right types of sectors to focus on. But maybe that's one of the things that you can do to control your career a little bit, is to think about which areas are going to be growth areas, irrespective of what the cyclical conditions of the market might be. Let's just go around real quick with bits of advice, I guess. So Dr. Sarah Ali, what's your advice to people who, working in the recruitment sector right now, or thinking about, there's a hiring freeze in my business, what should I do? What's your sort of input to that type of person?
Yeah, so if you're a tech recruiter and you're looking for applicants, within that space, I mean, I say take advantage of people's transferable skills, right? You have the technical part and you have the soft skills. I mean, coding and analytics, big data, whatever, machine learning, we all know that's in demand, but being able to talk to people and conveying that technical information, right, to non-technical audiences, that is hard to find. So if you can find that, obviously, in applicants, take advantage. And I don't think anybody's perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. You just kind of learn as you go. And so I think if people are willing to have the ability to learn and they have some agility in their background, talk to
Yeah, great advice. Learning ability, I think, is the skill, isn't it, these days? Because the world is changing at such a rapid click that information held in your head is going to be out of date as soon as it's in there. So what you have to do is the ability to constantly be able to find new solutions, learn new skills. That muscle memory of learning things, don't have that sort of atrophy in any way. John, let's go to you on this. Again, I don't, you're an analyst, you're a person that, tries to not actually give advice, I think, because professionally you want to try and objectively describe the situation as is. But if you could give advice to, say, someone who is in a recruiting or HR profession, what sort of things would you be saying to that person?
Well, I think that even in a recession, there's demand for certain roles. So anything public sector, there's still a need to provide these services. So I imagine employment will hold up pretty well there. I think the UK and policy would be very foolish if they didn't start taking move to net zero much more seriously than we did 6 months ago. I think 6 months ago it was kind of seen as a major cost and a nice to have, and now with the energy prices, it's can kind of fundamentally change the equation on what renewables can deliver us for us. And that means there's going to be huge markets for retrofitting and heat pumps and engineering roles in solar and wind farms, that sort of thing. So that's going to be huge. And governments, particularly the UK, we had kind of 10 years of austerity and not really wanting to spend, followed by a period of, no, actually, we'll happily spend 100 billion on furlough or propping up energy bills and that sort of thing. So, there's a chance that government might be more interested in making big investments in bigger projects that that can do well for hiring. So yeah, in a roundabout way, that's advice. There are winners and losers in a recession. There's always going to be industries that will benefit. Those kind of substitute goods. So your budget supermarkets are probably going to do quite well out of it and that sort of thing. So yeah, in a dynamic economy when things move around, it's about keeping your finger on the pulse and kind of looking at where those opportunities are, and they're always there.
Yeah, that's it. I think just to be aware of what's going on and try and just future align everything. I mean, that's just the general advice. I think most people who are watching this show probably have already thought along those lines at some point. It always makes sense to work in a field or work in a direction that is going to grow. That's the future it's going to be, rather than something that's in the past and receding. So as you say, energy efficiency, green tech, all of those places, clearly massive imperative to drive into those. There'll be more than just market forces driving that. There's going to be a national sort of industry policy in effect moving us in that direction. So that is not a bad place to start building some skills and building a network. Okay, that's it, folks. We've had a very, very good conversation today. It's obvious that this is a topic we can continue to talk about. I would totally recommend you go ahead and follow all of the people that you saw on the panel today here. We're going to keep talking about the economy. I think, Dr. Sarah, you're back with us for the next couple of weeks for the missing millions story. Where are the people and how can we bring them back? Make sure you join us for that. And yeah, hopefully you've got value from the show. Let me take this time to thank all of our guests for joining us. So Dr. Sarah Ali, thank you so much for waking up early in Chicago and joining us for Brainfood Live. John, boys, thank you so much for your last day in the office, but please do enjoy the next 2 weeks of your the next chapter. That's fantastic stuff. And yeah, love to get you back for another opportunity to chat. Colin, I think we've already lost you, so that's okay. You have a good day, sir. And Katrina, I think I've lost you as well, but great to see you, and you take care of yourself also. Okay, that's about it. We'll be back next week, folks. We are going to be talking about how to source on Slack. Would you believe it? We're back to sourcing, folks. Some of the most popular shows been doing this this year have been how to source on different platforms. How do you source on Reddit? How do you source on Discord? How are you going to source on TikTok? We're going to do Slack next week. So make sure you join us. Ala Pavlo is going to be there. Mark Dubel is going to be there. Nicolas Darcis is going to join us as well. So it's going to be a fabulous show. I understand they're going to actually show us some live techniques as we do it. So it's one of those where I think if you're looking for candidates and interested to find new techniques outside of the world of LinkedIn, this is one where you have to join. So follow the channel if you're interested in getting notified for that, and register for the show next week. Okay, that's about it, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed it.